Dead forums, places on the internet that either don't exist anymore or nobody visits. These are the worst crimes that happened there. Back in late 2010, an online user created a seemingly ordinary website called isanyoneup.com, which was basically like a party chat forum for people who had trouble sleeping and just wanted to talk to strangers. At first, the site looked like any other random hangout spot on the internet, until the creators suddenly posted a very explicit photo on the platform's late night event of his ex-girlfriend. And this very action would later cause a disturbing chain of events, making the person who launched the site the most hated man on the internet. Hunter Moore, a 39-year-old man living in Woodland, California, definitely isn't your average guy. While he grew up in a middle-class family, even from a young age he was extremely rebellious and hard to control. And by the time he was an adult, he still had no goals, no direction, and no clue what to do with his life. But all of that would change the moment he came back from spending months partying across multiple countries. At his parents' house, Hunter would take inspiration from the social media platform Facebook and launch the website Is Anyone Up, and he would even tell his personal lawyer Reza Zina about the website, who he kept around after all of the trouble he got into while partying overseas.
He really was looking exactly what the name of the website is Anyone Up. He would be 4 or 5 in the morning and he'd be like, hey, who else is up in San Francisco? What are you doing?
Now one evening, while he was using his own website to chat with his friends, Hunter would share a photo of his ex-girlfriend with no clothes on. And the rest of the group would follow suit, doing the exact same thing, with each person trying to go further than the last.
They want to call someone out or embarrass someone, so they're like, hey, look at this. And then they sent a picture and it was like, oh, you know what? That gives me an idea. I hated this girl and this was my ex, and then they sent a picture.
And from there on out, things would only get much worse. Around this time, a lot of people on Facebook would start seeing countless posts and statuses from friends saying, is anyone up? And although some just thought those people wanted to chat with each other, one person in particular, who we'll call Matthew, would ask one of his friends who posted the phrase what it actually meant, with his friends telling him the unsettling purpose of this message.
I found out about it and I called him. And I was like, well, what are you doing? What is this? He's like, oh, remember, like, getting all this girl's name?
It turns out that the private photos of girls that Hunter and the others shared on the website started gaining attention from a bunch of people online. And even though it was still supposed to be a party site, more and more explicit images of women posted without their knowledge kept getting uploaded and shared, turning the site into something it was never supposed to be. Now, as the weeks went by, the site became more and more popular, and Hunter actually started making money from the growing audience, even asking his lawyer if he could turn this website into something bigger.
And that's when he came to me and said, hey, I want to make this into a corporation of some sort. I don't know what kind of corporation to do it, and I need advice because it's growing. It went from having like 50 hits a day to 100,000.
And by the end of the year, the platform showed nothing but explicit images of people that were never meant to be shared, alongside screenshots of the victims' Facebook pages, putting their private lives on full display for everyone to see. And Hunter would even encourage people to leave comments under every single explicit photo posted on the site, which of course led to people commenting the nastiest things imaginable. Amanda Collins was a former fan of Hunter, and she would later talk about it after witnessing it firsthand.
As the website got more popular, the comments just got even nastier and just rude and almost borderline disgusting. Girls, whether they were pretty or not so attractive, either way, they just got ripped to shreds online.
And the worst part is, the victims of this growing wave of leaked private photos would have no way to protect themselves, because Hunter was actually protected behind a law called the Communications Decency Act, which basically protects site owners from being sued for what their users post. Now, people like Hunter getting your private info is actually more common than you think, which is why this video is sponsored by Aura. Right now, similar to Is Anyone Up, personal information like your name, home address, and even financial details could be floating around on the dark web, available to anyone willing to pay. And the scary part is, it likely ended up getting there without you ever knowing of it. Companies that collect your information get breached constantly, data leaks out, and cyber criminals grab it without consequence. That's exactly why I use Aura to get ownership of my own information information. Aura scans the dark web and data broker sites for your exposed information, sends automated opt-out requests to remove it, and alerts you if you've been compromised. It even includes up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, just in case the worst ever happens. And if you ever even need personal help, Aura's fraud experts are available 24/7. You can take control of your own online privacy today. Just use my link in the description for a free 14-day trial. Hunter would even go on to say that it wasn't him who uploaded the content, claiming it's the users instead. Now naturally, this website would get more and more complaints as it got more popular, but even then, when desperate victims would beg Hunter to remove their photos, he would just reject them instantly without hesitation. Lost in his own greed and depravity, Hunter would show no empathy towards the people he was actively hurting. On some occasions, he would even make the complaints he received public. In one case, for example, a man tells him that his niece left this earth because of the site, and in response, Hunter would simply say this online: "I'm gonna sound like the most evil but let's be real for a second. If someone kills themselves over being on the site, do you know how much money I'd make? At the end of the day, I don't want anybody to hurt themselves, but if they do, thank you for the money." This enraged even more people online, and not long after, Hunter's arrogance would finally start to backfire on him. On December 6, 2011, Facebook bans him for life. They create a special code just for him, making sure he stays blocked no matter how many times he changes his IP address. But true to his reputation, Hunter would simply respond by posting a photo of his own genitalia, just to show that he isn't bothered by any of it. And instead of backing down, he would keep bragging to the press that his site is getting 5 million visits a month. But eventually, out of everything the website hosted, one photo would take down the entire thing. In 2012, a topless image of a woman named Kayla Laws would get posted by Hunter on the website, leaving her devastated after having her privacy violated for everyone to see. In an interview about what happened, she talks about how her entire reputation and even her career were ruined because of it.
There was a screenshot of my Twitter account on the website, and so a lot of people started messaging me and direct messaging me and making comments on my Twitter account about the photo. They would be like, "Damn girl, you look good," like I'd hit that, or "I want to F you," and like stuff like that, just really vulgar things.
And even though there were already hundreds of selfies like this on Hunter's platform, this time was different because Kayla says she never actually shared this picture with anyone.
I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't send the photo to anybody. It was literally privately saved in my email in a folder just titled "My Pics."
Now, the moment she would find out about her private image being leaked and posted, she immediately tells her mother, Charlotte Laws, who's actually worked as a private investigator for years. Now, Charlotte knew nothing about the site or the man behind it, but she takes the matter into her own hands and starts doing whatever she can to get her daughter's photos removed. So she sends them an email saying, "Dear Hunter, please remove all photos of Kayla Laws." Days would go by with no response from Hunter, so she instead started contacting everyone connected to him, hoping to expose him to the people who still didn't know who he really was. She first reaches out to his lawyer, Reza, and then she tries his mom through her workplace. And since she isn't there at the time, she tells her associates instead. The word eventually reaches Hunter's mother, and less than 10 days later, Kayla's photos are finally taken down. This isn't the end, however. Charlotte would continue her investigation with one clear reason in mind. The photo of her daughter had never been sent to anyone. She was convinced that Kayla's computer had been hacked, so she spends weeks collecting the names of Hunter's newest victims and personally speaks to each one to figure out how this keeps happening.
And that's when I started reaching out to all these victims. I started contacting people who were depicted on the site, and that's when I came to learn that 40% of the people had been hacked, 12% had been photoshopped.
By this time, Charlotte finally finds the flaw that could actually send Hunter to jail. While the website Is Anyone Up may have been protected under the Communications Decency Act, hacking was most definitely a federal crime in the US. She decides to contact the FBI right away, and when they respond, she pushes even further by bringing the investigation to the media. And on May 12, 2012, the issue gets brought out into the world, leaving Hunter in a state of panic, desperately trying to make himself invisible to the public. This is the point point at which Hunter actually shuts down his website. But since he was so addicted to living the celebrity life by having an absurd amount of controversy and attention to him, he just couldn't bring himself to lie low and would instead keep protesting his innocence on Twitter. Even worse, Hunter would post a series of tweets targeting Charlotte and Kayla by making their names public. And this would make things even worse for the two, with both of them later explaining what happened, saying,
It became a bigger and bigger war as Hunter Moore learned my identity. Then his followers started coming after me. I mean, I got death threats, I got computer viruses.
We even had someone come out into the front yard and sit there, and then we walked up to them and said, you know, can we help you? And he rushed off, almost crashing into like a wall.
In December of 2012, however, an extremely infamous yet mysterious group of hackers called Anonymous would publish a video online titled Operation Hunt Hunter. It was known at the time that these hackers were orchestrating a lot of public campaigns against people they believed were doing bad things, with them eventually getting into contact with Charlotte, telling her that they were aware of what Hunter and his followers were doing to her and Kayla, and that they were going to protect them. And a few weeks later, Anonymous hacks into Hunter's personal data and makes it accessible to the entire internet, crashing his personal website and leaking a bunch of his private information online. As for the FBI, they would discover that since 2011, Hunter had been relying on a man named Charles Evans to hack into private computers and steal explicit photos. One email even shows the exact instructions he gave, telling the hacker to collect personal content from exactly 6 guys and 6 girls. Right after that, the FBI carries out a search of Hunter's house in Woodland, and for the first time, the most hated man on the internet realizes that all of his vile actions are finally catching up to him. However, it wasn't until February of 2014 that Hunter finally gets arrested at his home by Sacramento police, and he went on trial a year later and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison along with a $500,000 fine for unauthorized access of a computer and aggravated identity theft. And even though the charges didn't reflect the full extent of what he did, they were still enough to put him behind bars and take down everything he had built. But unlike him, this next person took things even further, and what happened because of it was far more disturbing.
The autopsy revealed 19 separate injuries, with 6 to 8 of the injuries being blows to the head.
Back in the early 2000s, MySpace was one of the biggest social networking sites online. It worked like a public forum where anyone could post music, write vlogs, and talk to strangers in real life. Most people used it to show off or meet new friends. But with no identity checks or age verification, it didn't take long before someone took advantage of that in one of the most disturbing ways imaginable. It's 2006. Carly Ryan is a 15-year-old girl in Stirling, South Australia, and she's excited about the idea of making new friends online. And with social media platforms booming as it's still relatively new to most people, she decides to create an account on MySpace. While browsing through profiles, she comes across an 18-year-old guy named Brandon, whose username is Corrupt Koala. She decides to add him, and they would start talking not long after. Carly and Brandon become friends, and would discover that they actually have a lot in common. Brandon tells her that he's an aspiring musician who lives in Melbourne, Australia, with his adoptive dad, Shane. Now this would go on for quite a while, and Carly would start falling for Brandon. And as they grow closer, their usual chats on MySpace would turn into phone calls. Now Carly's mom, Sonia, is seemingly okay with her relationship with Brandon. And while she does acknowledge their age gap, she still keeps an eye on their interactions from time to time. Sometime later, with how well things are going between them, they actually decide to start a romantic relationship. And even Sonia warms up to their relationship, seeing how they talk to each other. At the same time, the adoptive dad, Shane, also begins to take interest in them, often showing support of their posts online. Now months go by, and Carly actually tells Brandon that her 50th birthday is coming up in late January, but he replies saying he'll be in the US during that time, and that he's sorry that he probably won't make it. Carly is devastated after reading this, but to her surprise, Brandon says that his dad Shane will actually be passing through South Australia for work, and that he'll personally drop off Brandon's gift on her birthday. Without hesitation, Carly asks her mom if Shane can visit to celebrate her birthday and drop off Brandon's gift. Now Sonia is hesitant at first, but after speaking with Shane over the phone to hear his intention for herself, she changes her mind and agrees to let him stop by. On the evening of January 26, 2007, Shane arrives at Carly's home and meets her along with the rest of the family, handing her the gift she had been waiting for. Overjoyed, Carly opens Brandon's presents and sees bags, clothes, and other usual items. But things take a strange turn when she also finds a nurse's outfit, a pair of underwear, a corset, and even some fancy dress costumes. Not thinking much of it, however, Carly goes on to enjoy the rest of her night. But during the party, both she and her family start noticing how Shane sticks closely to her wherever she goes, acting in a way that feels strangely possessive. By the end of the night, when Shane tells Sonia he's going to find a hotel, she tells him that he can actually stay in the spare room instead, since he traveled so far just to see Carly. Shane politely agrees. But the next morning, as Sonia is getting up and preparing for the day, something happens that horrifies her. She walks past Carly's room and notices someone lying next to her while she's still asleep, and after taking a closer look, she realizes it's Shane, fully clothed, laying on top of the sheets of her bed. Terrified, Sonia rushes in and tells him to get his things and leave the house immediately. Now, because of this extremely disturbing incident, Sonia starts paying closer attention to Carly's online activity right away, and even Carly would open up about everything that had happened during the day of the party with Shane. Not only had he been hitting on her, but he also did other disgusting things such as peeping on her while she tried on the clothes during a shopping trip they'd been on together. Now, despite all of this, Carly didn't know any better at the time, and so she begs Sonia not to take any action, saying she still wants to patch things up with her potential father-in-law, but her mom simply refuses. She says that she's scared after what happened and decides to cut off Carly's internet and take away her phone. Soon after, Sonia sends an email to Shane, warning him that if he ever tries to contact Carly ever again, she would call the police and have him reported. Expecting him to stay away and at least apologize for everything he did, she's instead met with the threat of legal action from Shane, even calling her a pathetic and gutless bitch. A few weeks later, on February 19, 2007, Carly tells her mom that she's going to a sleepover with a friend and that they're meeting up in the city. Around 4 p.m, she leaves the house after hugging her mother 4 times and telling her that she loves her. Sonia doesn't realize yet that those are the last words she'll ever hear from her daughter. Later that night, Sonia suddenly gets a call from a number she doesn't recognize. The man on the line says he found Carly's purse along with her contact details and tells her where it was picked up. As soon as he says the location, her soul leaves her body, because the bag was found in a suburb Carly had never mentioned and had no reason to actually be in. She immediately contacts Carly's friends and finds out Carly never showed up for the sleepover. Panicking, Sonia calls the police to report her daughter missing, and just a moment later, the police would inform Sonia that they found the body of a girl matching Carly's description in Horseshoe Bay, Port Elliot, 80 kilometers away from their city. They ask Sonia to come to the station to identify the body, and as soon as she gets there, the body's nail polish gives it away, and it's confirmed to be Carly's. And at this point, it's when the police realizes this wasn't an accident, but a murder. And shortly after, the autopsy reveals her body had 19 separate injuries. 6 to 8 of those were blows to the head, and the autopsy shows her cause of death was a combination of physical trauma to the face and drowning. The investigation immediately turns to nearby CCTV footage of the area, and the officers catch an unsettling glimpse of Carly walking down the boardwalk, accompanied by 2 men. They also come across 2 witnesses who would confirm Carly was indeed with 2 other people at Port Elliot Beach. They go back to the footage and they spot a blue van with an unclear license plate, the vehicle those men would use to leave the area. After tracking its location, it leads them to a property near Melbourne, Victoria, and when they arrive at the house, they meet Gary Francis Newman, a 48-year-old divorced father of 3. Once inside the house, they notice a computer logged in under the username Brandon Kane. With the evidence now in sight, Gary quickly gets arrested on the spot, and the police immediately start searching around for more leads in the property. And as they open Gary's desk drawer, they find a notebook filled with usernames and passwords. It turns out Gary had created over 200 accounts online, including Brandon Kane, and even more shockingly, Shane. And on his computer, they find several tabs open, showing chats with more girls, all logged in as Brandon. What makes this even more terrifying, they also find a camera Gary took to Carly's house on her birthday, with one of the photos showing Carly standing next to the man she believed was Shane. It doesn't take long for them to figure out that the other man walking beside her was actually Gary's adopted son, who he had hired to pose as Brandon. And with that much evidence, Gary is put on trial just a few days later. And this is where he tries to explain his actions, telling the court he saw himself as a stepfather to Carly, and that he suffers from bipolar disorder and OCD, and that he only ever identified as Shane, not Brandon. But everything he says turns out to be completely useless, because even though Gary and his 17-year-old son plead not guilty, the entire jury finds him guilty. And on January 21st, 2010, the court sentences him to spend the rest of his life in prison, with a chance at parole in 29 years. As for his son, who witnessed the murder and allegedly helped his father take Carly's life, he ends up being charged with absolutely nothing, as the jury believed he deserved a second chance. This next one, however, had destroyed not just one, but multiple lives.
She stated that she was tired of pretending to be happy and having to mask how exhausting her life really was. She wanted to rest and never open her eyes again. She seemed partial to hanging.
While most online forums were used for casual discussions and the like, a Usenet news group, which is an early kind of internet message board called alt.sword.methods, was known for something much darker. It was a place where people shared graphic methods for ending their lives, posted farewell notes, and talked openly about their struggles without censorship. Many people believe these spaces actually had a positive effect, as it was shown from time to time to save lives rather than help end them. But for one twisted person, it became a hunting ground for their own disturbing and vile fantasies. In July of 2005, a person going by the name of Mark Drybro was in a serious battle with his depression, which led him to post on the notorious Usenet forum under the username Spooky, saying, "Does anyone have details of unaliving methods where there isn't access to anything high up to tie the rope to?" And you can probably make out what he was referring to. Almost in an instant, he gets a reply from somebody going by the online username of Lee Dow, who's supposedly a 20-year-old female nurse from Minnesota who keeps a relatively low profile on the forum. She tells Mark to check his email, and she then goes on to describe in graphic detail how he could fulfill his desire. Now a few weeks would pass, and Mark's sister Carol would decide to drive to her brother's house, and after arriving, she knocks on the door multiple times, but nobody answers. Thinking Mark's still asleep, she lets herself in the house, and that's when she notices a note taped to the inside door, written in uppercase letters. "Please call the police. Do not go upstairs. Go home, hand this note to the police." This sends her into panic, and even though the message tells her not to, she rushes upstairs. The bedroom door, however, is blocked, so she forces herself in and finds her brother, unfortunately, lifeless by the door. Horrendously shocked by what she sees, she quickly rushes over to him to hold him up, hoping she could still save him. She starts calling for help on the phone too, shouting as loud as she can, all while standing there and refusing to let go. But unfortunately, as soon as the authorities and the paramedics arrive, she sees that Mark's already passed away in her arms. The medics take him away, and Carol decides to log onto his computer to look for the reasons why he took his own life, and finds out that Mark had actually been spending time on alt.sword.methods. He'd been researching different ways for weeks, and eventually got involved in a pact with a nurse named Lee Dow. She even sent him a message the same day he died, asking, "Are you alright, Mark? Lee." And this wouldn't be the only case where Lee reached out to someone. Not long after, a girl from Central America, who we'll call Jane from now on, starts posting repeatedly on the forum as she begins considering doing the same thing. And through her posts, she ends up in direct contact with Lee. At the same time, she also gets a reply from someone else, an older woman named Celia Blay, a 65-year-old grandmother who had found the site by accident. Fortunately, Celia was the kind of person who saw the site as a way to help others, reminding them that they still deserve to live. Jane starts talking to her more often, and within weeks, she finally feels to begin better. But there was just one problem. She tells Celia that before they met, she'd already made a life-ending pact with Lee, and now she feels obligated to go through with it. She explains that Lee had planned for both of them to end their lives together over webcam, and was now starting to get impatient, putting her under pressure and making her feel like she didn't have a choice. Celia would quickly respond, telling her that she doesn't owe anyone anything, and that her life is more important than a promise made to a stranger online. After learning what Lee had been trying to do, Celia begins tracking the nurse's account closely, reading every comment and keeping watch to stop her from contacting anyone else. Even so, about a year later, a 22-year-old researcher from Croatia named Nikola would post on the forum asking for help, and within 2 hours, Lee would reply with, "Check your email." Over the next 6 months, their emails would get more and more personal, as they would exchange more and more messages. And by the end of it, Lee again would propose a pact to leave this earth together over a video call, just like she did with Jane. She walks him through the steps, giving detailed instructions. But after all the planning, Nikola ends up backing out before it actually happens. And in the days that follow, after a plan gets shut down again, Nikola completely rejects her pact this time, and Lee disappears from the site. Because of this, many people on the forum actually think that she left this earth. And as more attention builds on the forum, more users start to come forward, saying that they also made this life-ending pact with her. The people think she actually went through with it. Until 2 months later, a user we'll call Joey comes forward, who also made a pact with her, saying that Lee just emailed him again, trying to convince him to go through with it. She was still alive. To confirm who she really was, Joey tries to get her on a call, but she tells him that she simply can't, claiming that her phone doesn't have a camera and that she can't do long-distance calls. From there on, the forum turns against her, believing she's just a lunatic who gets off on convincing people to leave this earth on webcam. And when things couldn't get worse, the users would find out that some of the victims of Lee were under the age of 18, with a bunch of people actually realizing what kind of monster she truly is. And so Lee completely vanishes from the website. But just a few days later, 2 new users, Falcon Girl and Cami D, would make themselves known across the forum. And their activity on the site would mimic Lee almost to a T. The way they typed were similar to Lee, and they also told people to check their email. Now it's not known how many people ended up getting contacted through these accounts on the forum, but it's almost certainly in the hundreds. And over time, many forum users would stop posting after being told to check their inboxes, and they would make death agreements with these 3 users. Now Celia, who tried to save people, just kept digging deeper in order to figure out who was really behind all of these accounts. And she slowly but surely matches patterns and saves every piece of evidence she can. And at one point she even finds a few IP traces that seem to lead somewhere, but it's not enough yet. But despite that, she goes straight to law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, showing clear evidence of how this person is pressuring and manipulating people, some as young as 30, to do these horrible things. She even says there have been explicit conversations between this person and their victims. But even after all of this, she's met with no response. This doesn't stop Celia from trying to put this person behind bars though. Except while all of this is happening, Cami D gets in contact with another person named Nadia. After Nadia tells Cami that she's been deeply struggling in life, Cami tries to convince her to enter a death pact, where they both leave this earth, telling her they'd do it together, so she wouldn't be alone in her final moments. Nadia rejects the offer in the beginning, saying she wants to leave in a different way, to make it look like an accident, so the people she loved the most would never think they had done anything wrong. And on March 9th, 2008, shortly after their conversations, Nadia suddenly disappears from her dorm room. Her roommate alerts the police and school authorities, saying Nadia had been openly expressing that she wanted to end it. As her family begins searching for her, investigators would check her electronics and find what they later described as a treasure trove on her laptop. It turns out that before she left, Nadia had been speaking with Cami on the forum, discussing different methods and planning out how she was going to do it. The police were visibly shocked, knowing Cami had given Nadia exact instructions on how to make sure she'd actually leave this earth on her first attempt. And even worse, she told her that using a bridge wouldn't have a high success rate, and said doing it in her dorm over webcam would be a better option. A few weeks would go by and Nadia's body would get recovered, revealing that she'd into a frozen body of water. And once they actually confirmed that it was her, they would finally begin focusing the entire investigation on trying to figure out who this Cami person really was. And they would start tracing their messages, checking IP logs, and digging through every platform this person uses. And eventually they would follow one of the leads all the way to a specific computer in Minnesota. And that's when they would find the person behind all of these accounts, William Dinkel. William was a 63-year-old man living in St. Paul, Minnesota. He had a wife, 2 kids, a religious background, and had worked as a licensed practical nurse in several hospitals. At first glance, it seemed like he was the kind of guy who'd already settled in life, but everything actually started falling apart back in 1994 when he'd make a series of clinical errors involving giving the improper prescription to a patient and forgetting to document a resident's deteriorating condition, which would result in him losing his job. After that, he would begin spending more and more time on internet forums, mostly the ones centered around life-ending discussions, and he would develop an obsession around death and eventually decide to go on these platforms himself, not to help anyone, but to manipulate them into going through with it. After arriving at his house, the officers immediately confront him about his online activity, and all he can say is, "I think I know what you mean," which he follows up by saying that even though he knew encouraging people to leave this earth is inappropriate and illegal, he was still obsessed to the point of not being able to stop himself. He even claims that he kept making life-ending pacts even after a lot of people in the chat rooms realized what kind of person he was. And after being questioned further, he would finally admit to being Lee, Falcon Girl, and Cammy, and a number of other usernames. On March 15, 2011, 3 years after Nadia's death, William would finally face the full extent of his crimes. He would get charged with advising, encouraging, urging, and assisting both Nadia and Mark in their lives, and on May 4th, 2011, he's sentenced to 360 days in prison. But somehow this next person tops even this case.
It takes a little while for the reality of it to set in, that this has just happened to your little girl.
Yahoo Messenger was one of the first places online where total strangers could talk in real time. But by the early 2000s, it was already flooded with fake profiles and chat rooms full of adults pretending to be and while most people didn't think much of it, one particular individual would end up making it clear just how dangerous the platform can become. It would all start on December 31st, 2001, when Casey Woody, a 2-year-old girl in Little Rock, Arkansas, invites her friends Jessica and Samantha to her house to celebrate the new year. While waiting for the clock to strike 12, they decide to pass the time by hanging out in a Christian-themed chat group on Yahoo Messenger, using Casey's account under the username Model Behavior 36. Around 6 PM, with only a small number of people in the chat room, one of them stands out among the rest and quickly gets their attention. His username is jazzman_df. And after seeing that his name is Dave, a typical 16-year-old blonde Californian surfer, based on his profile, they immediately get excited to talk to him, since they've always wanted to meet someone from out of state. Without wasting any time, they start chatting with him, and as the hours pass, Casey actually becomes completely captivated by his charm. Their conversation continues for hours, even causing Casey and her friends to miss the New Year's Eve ball drop. After that night, Casey and Dave would begin talking every single day, and as they start getting closer, Casey eventually encourages Jessica and Samantha to add him on Yahoo Messenger too, and both of them would grow close to Dave in no time. But unlike Casey, her two friends are a bit suspicious of Dave, especially Sam, who finds it strange how he constantly uses words like groovy or wicked that feel way too outdated for someone his age. As for Casey's dad, Rick Woody, who's a police officer, even though he knows she's been chatting with strangers online, he doesn't think much of it, as he believes that as long as she's inside their actual home, nothing bad could really happen. As their bond gets deeper, Casey starts opening up to Dave about her mother's passing and her struggles with depression, with Dave also telling her that his aunt is now in a coma after a car crash. And these shared stories of personal tragedy would bring them even closer. And before long, their usual conversations would start going beyond just chatting on Yahoo Messenger. In the summer of 2002, with Dave now turning 18, Casey finally introduces him to her dad. But much to her shock, Rick actually tells her to stop communicating with him, saying he's far too old and that she doesn't even really know who this guy is. This of course upsets Casey, so she would instead just continue talking to Dave behind his back. Now around the same time, Casey would meet another person online named Scott, under the username Taz2999, in the same Christian-themed chat room. He's a 14-year-old football and wrestling fan from Georgia, and much closer to Casey's actual age. And they would start chatting regularly too, with Casey slowly developing feelings for him, just like she did with Dave. Now she eventually actually has a hard time choosing between the two, until she decides that Scott is the one she wants to actually be with. By October, Casey and Scott's relationship would officially begin, with her even updating her relationship status on Yahoo Messenger to show it. Dave, on the other hand, would still keep calling her every single day in an attempt to pull her back in. He starts bringing up his aunt again, saying her condition is getting worse and that he needs someone to be there for him. Being the kind-hearted person she is, Casey does her best to console him, and eventually Dave reveals his intention of going to Arkansas to be with his aunt, telling Casey that he wants to meet up with her. Now, since she's actually in a committed relationship now, Casey responds by saying she isn't interested and that she doesn't intend to meet with him at all, with her thinking nothing bad would happen after saying this. In the fall, Casey invites Jessica over for a sleepover at her house, saying no one was home except her, with her dad still on duty and Tim, her brother, who's out attending night classes. And around 10 p.m, Casey gets a call from Dave, and as they're talking, both of them suddenly hear strange noises coming from outside the room. The kitchen floorboard was squeaking as if someone was actually there. Casey yells out and asks if it's her brother or her dad, but no one answers. They start panicking and rush to the bedroom door, pushing a dresser in front of it to block whoever might be outside. Still on the phone with Dave, Casey says someone might have broken into the house, and almost as soon as he tells her not to worry, the noises from the kitchen suddenly stop. After a long silence, they then slowly step out to check, but no one's actually there. A few months would pass after what happened, with nothing similar occurring again. However, towards the end of 2002, on December 3rd, Casey heads to school when she's suddenly confronted by Samantha, who tells her how dangerous it actually is to date somebody online. And this would quickly turn into an argument between the two, with Casey not accepting anything she's saying, and Samantha even going as far as asking a school counselor to warn her about the risks. But Casey still doesn't budge. After school, Casey then meets up with Jessica and Samantha and asks if they can do a sleepover at either of their houses, but since they have class the next day, both of them politely say no. As soon as she gets home that night, with no one else around, Casey rushes to her computer and logs on to talk to Scott. The conversation goes on for hours, with Casey laughing about how Samantha still thinks he's a fraud, but at some point, Dave calls her again. For a while, she's juggling both conversations at once, talking to Dave on the phone while still chatting with Scott. She then decides to introduce both of them to each other. While they're talking, however, Dave suddenly tells Casey that his aunt, the one who lives in her state, has just passed away, and like the kind-hearted person that she is, she comforts him as best as she can, while also letting know Scott what's going on. But then, in the middle of the conversation, she stops replying altogether out of nowhere. Scott is confused, and so he messages her multiple times, thinking that something might have just come up. Then, at exactly 9:41 p.m, he gets a short reply that doesn't sound like her at all, with the message saying, "Yeah." Getting more worried by the second, he keeps sending her messages and visibly starts to panic. And by 10:15 p.m, he just calls her, but Casey's not answering at all. That is when Casey's brother finally gets home. However, he can't find his sister anywhere, even after searching the entire house. After an hour of not finding her, he decides to call their dad and tells him that Casey's missing. In a rush, Rick drives back to the house, and once he arrives, he sees that Casey's glasses are broken. Her jacket and shoes are also still there, so he decides to hurry into the woods to look for her, and eventually decides to call his colleagues for help. Soon after, the local police show up and start searching the entire area to try and find Casey. Knowing how critical the first 24 hours are in a missing persons case, they also put out a statewide alert to help get the word out faster. The news spreads. Volunteers from nearby communities start pouring in to help with the search, and the FBI would also step in to help with the investigation, taking Casey's computer as evidence, in hopes that her last chat conversations might reveal what actually happened. The next morning, agents would quickly head to Casey's school to talk to her friends for any leads. Samantha and Jessica would then tell them about the strange sleepover idea Casey mentioned the day before, suggesting that she might have felt uneasy or scared and didn't want to go home. They'd also shared details about Casey's online boyfriend, Scott, who they immediately thought might have wanted to meet her. After confirming Scott had been chatting with Casey online, the FBI would go through their chat and track him down in Atlanta and show up to his house the same day, where they'd confirm that he was home the night Casey actually disappeared. There wasn't any evidence tying Scott to Casey's disappearance, so the investigators have no choice but to move on, until Samantha and Jessica actually tell them about Dave, someone who they hadn't mentioned in their first FBI interview. They recall Dave telling Casey that he planned to visit his sick aunt in Arkansas, so the FBI turns their attention to Dave, who's now the main suspect. While searching Casey's things at her house, they find 2 pieces of paper where she ranked Dave and Scott by name. From that, they actually learn Dave's full name and that he's from California. With that information, the FBI promptly starts checking hotels and motels around town, hoping to find any leads on him. And when they get to the Motel 6 in Conway, they spot a car with a California license plate parked outside, which was unusual. So they ask the front desk who the owner of the car is, and they're able to get the information they need. It turns out the owner of the car is named David, but his last name is different from the one on the paper. It's Fuller instead of Fagan. But despite that, the FBI still has suspicions, especially when they learn that he checked in just 1 day before Casey went missing. Almost right away, however, after searching around the area, they discover that David is dead outside the vehicle from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. After finishing up the scene of the crime, they begin to dig deeper, and the investigators find out that David broke into Casey's home the night she disappeared, used chloroform to knock her out, and then carried her to his rented minivan. He also drove to a storage unit where he committed horrifying acts before killing her, and once he realized the police were closing in on him, he ended his own life. Now, after the investigators would piece everything together, the timeline becomes painfully clear. David Fuller had been planning this long before January. He spent some time in Arkansas in October, most likely to watch Casey from a distance. He scoped out her routine, figured out where she lived, and mapped out exactly how to get to her without anyone noticing. David Fuller was a 47-year-old used car salesman from San Diego, married with 2 kids, and he already had a long history of disturbing behavior, including an indecent exposure charge and violent outbursts towards his wife, who tried to divorce him 7 months before Casey disappeared. On December 9th, 2002, Casey Woody was finally laid to rest, buried next to her mother at a cemetery in Arkansas. And to keep her memory alive, her family would start a non-profit organization to raise awareness about online safety, making sure nothing like this ever happens again. This next abomination, however, took us crazy obsessions beyond just people.
Magnotta is wanted for the gruesome murder and dismemberment.
Best Gore was one of the many sites in the early 2000s posting highly violent and bloody content online. It was the time of the internet when people loved testing their capacity to watch graphic stuff without flinching. But in 2012, this obscure Canadian site was brought to international attention due to one man. Eric Newman was born in Ontario, Canada in 1982, but since he changed his name to Luca Magnotta later on, we will be using that name. Even though financially stable, Luca's parents were far from mentally stable. His cleaning-obsessed mother used to lock him and his siblings in their rooms and would make sure their pet rabbits froze to death. And his father was diagnosed with schizophrenia and split up with his wife. So naturally, Luca had to move in with his grandmother, Phyllis Yerkin. For Luca, Phyllis was the only pillar of support against the mental illnesses of his parents. So when she heard rumors about Luca behaving weirdly in his class, she took him to a psychiatrist. And soon enough, he too would get diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in 1999. And after that, he would drop out of school and spent much of his time staying in psychiatric houses, where he would strongly believe that the government was trying to spy on him. Since he was suffering from the illness, he was given some allowance by the government. But instead of putting it to some productive use, Luca decided to get on the streets and sell himself. And slowly but surely, he would go into the queer adult film industry, and even managed to record a few videos in 2002. In 2005, he had a stint as a gay model for Fat Boy magazine under the name Jimmy. As you can see, Luca was from the very beginning a lover of attention. He wanted to be in the spotlight and wanted to be talked about. And this behavior is exactly what makes him do the things he'll go on to do. His adult film career wouldn't give him much of the fame he wanted to achieve. So he would change his name and also his face and decide to give auditions to TV shows. Some of the audition clips are still online, especially an audition for the Canadian gay show Coverboy. In this clip, Luca comes off as a guy who's incredibly obsessed with how he looks and how people perceive him, which makes the replies to the judges' questions very tight and awkward.
I think for this competition, you gotta be a little bit built up, you know? Like
I have no problem gaining weight. Like I can gain weight if I need to gain weight.
I'm actually thinking more muscle definition. I think you do have a very nice lean.
That could happen really quickly. I can gain weight really quickly.
Now unfortunately, he would end up getting rejected. And over time, these rejections would end up making him more desperate for popularity. One of his early attempts at popularity was creating multiple Facebook profiles and posting rumors about himself. These rumors were mostly gossipy and very exaggerated so that people would talk about them. One of these disturbing rumors, for example, was an article that claimed Luka had fathered a child with his own sister. The whole article talks about the story in great detail, and it would turn out he actually wrote this article himself. Another equally disturbing rumor he spread about himself was that he was dating the Canadian serial killer Karla Homolka. Now surprisingly, this rumor actually worked and propelled him into the spotlight. He even got interviewed by the Toronto Sun, where he denied the rumor being true. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more fame, and the result of this desperation was one of the most viral and disturbing videos ever uploaded on YouTube. One boy, two kittens. The video starts off normally and might be even considered to be cute when Luka pets two small kittens, but slowly the video takes dark turns as Luka starts putting those kittens into a plastic bag. After that, he would connect the bag to a vacuum cleaner to suck air out of it and suffocate the animals. This video instantly went viral and people would start talking about it, but it didn't stop there. In the second video, Luka drowns a kitten in the bathtub full of water, and in the third one, he feeds a kitten to a huge python. All of these videos only increased his popularity more and more, but unfortunately for him, he was being hunted. A group of animal rights activists identified the person in the video to be Luka by forming a private Facebook group, and they even offered $5,000 to anyone who could find him, but Luka simply denied everything. He would continue to insist that he was innocent and that he wasn't the one in the video. Alex West, a journalist for the Toronto Sun, would even confront him and meet him in real life, where Luka would get annoyed and escape the blame by saying,
"It suddenly occurred to me you got two cats here, little kittens.
That's not me.
That isn't you?
No, it's not me. People are really good with Photoshop these days, aren't they?"
You'd think Luka would have stopped there, but no, he didn't. He still had to make his final mark on the world. He still wanted to achieve the ultimate popularity. So he would devise a gruesome plan and put on a Craigslist ad, asking for guys looking for someone who wants to enjoy a night with them. And unfortunately for the person who responded to this ad, international student John Lin, this would end up costing him his life. John moved to Canada in 2010 to study computer engineering at Concordia University. And since he was an immigrant, John had to work hard to keep up with his tuition fees. He worked multiple part-time jobs and was working as a store clerk when he responded to the Craigslist post. Even though John seemed to be working well, deep down he was conflicted. On one side, he was secretly gay, and on the other, his family from China was pressuring him to get married and settle down with a woman. The pressure was so much that he even married one, but ended up divorcing her immediately. From then on, he was in many on and off relationships with guys. And when he saw a Craigslist post for a night of fun with someone named Luka, he didn't think much of it. It's May 24th, 2012, and John ends his shift and visits Luka's apartment. He's even captured by CCTV while entering the apartment with Luka. This would be the last recording of him alive. Much of what happens between Luka and John is not known, but a small part of it was recorded and posted on Best Score by Luka himself on May 25th. In this disturbing 11-minute video, we see John tied to the bed and Luka standing over him. Over the course of the video, Luka goes on to hurt John multiple times with a screwdriver, and not stopping there, he would do unspeakable things to him after. This video gets an immediate response, and people would even start reacting to it on YouTube, not knowing the seriousness of the situation. Now, viewers on Best Score would start reporting the video, but despite that, it would still take a couple of days before the video would come to the attention of the police. And the person who brings it to attention is none other than Luka himself. On May 29th, Luka mails John's left foot to the headquarters of the Conservative Party of Canada and left hand to the Liberal Party. He also sends other body parts to different places, even to 2 schools. It seems as if Luka wanted to once and for all seal his popularity. At the same time, a janitor working at Luka's apartment had discovered a suitcase lying around. When he opened, he was horrified to find John in it. And this is where it gets really disturbing. Luka even left his identification papers in there, so the police wouldn't be mistaken this time. Once they hear that, the police quickly rush to his flat and break in only to find a bloody mess. The mattress and the bathtub had bloody stains, and when they opened the closet, they found, "If you don't like the reflection, don't look in the mirror. I don't care," written on the inside. After watching the security camera footage of John entering with Luca and then Luca placing something in the trash, police quickly realized that Luca is the main suspect. But it was actually too late by then. Luca was already on his flight to Paris. It would take a couple of more days for Luca to be actually arrested. An international manhunt squad was assembled and sent off to Europe. There, Luca proved to be difficult to catch, since he was escaping from one place to the next. Finally though, he was arrested in an internet cafe, whose security footage shows him enter alone but exit with Berlin police. And this is where it gets truly weird. At the time of his arrest, Luca was in the internet cafe to read news articles about himself. Till the end, he was obsessed with only one thing: Luca. When he was put on trial, Luca first tried to free himself by claiming he was innocent, but seeing that it wasn't working, he started using his mental illness as a trump card. All of the psychiatrists who evaluated him diagnosed him with variations of schizophrenia and psychotic instability. But in the end, after a 12-week trial, Luca was found to be guilty of all charges and was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no chance of parole. But the last case truly reaches a whole new meaning of disturbing.
3 members of the Richardson family had been murdered, with their second child missing.
In the early 2000s, Vampire Freaks was a social networking site built for goths, emos, and alternate teens who didn't feel like they belonged anywhere else. Users could share photos, write blog posts, and join public forums filled with dark music, edgy comments, and strangers from all over the world. And while most users saw it as one harmless site, one girl would end up meeting someone who'd pull her into something that could never be undone. It's April 23rd, 2006. In the quiet neighborhood of Southview, Medicine Hat, a young boy walks over to his friend's house to play. But after knocking and getting no answer, he steps off the porch and looks through the basement window, when he sees someone lying completely still. Shocked by what he saw, he runs back home and tells his mom. She immediately calls the police to check on what's going on. And when officers arrive at the house, they find the front door unlocked and everything inside eerily quiet. As they step in and begin searching, they come across a horrifying scene. In the basement, a man and a woman have been stabbed to death. And upstairs, they find the lifeless body of a boy in his bed, still surrounded by the stuffed animals he always sleeps with. The question is, how did this exactly happen in the first place? Jasmine was a 12-year-old girl known for expressing herself as a dark and gothic person online. She would eventually create an account on vampirefreaks.com under the username Runaway Devil, along with others like Xcaller Kitty and X Mayhem. And from there, her profile would be filled in photos of her in thick eyeliner, wearing goth clothing and even posing with fake guns, with her listing her interests as piercings, tattoos, and loud music, which is very typical for an emo teen in the mid-2000s. In March 2006, Jasmine would decide to go out with her friends to one of the many local punk shows playing around their area. And as soon as they arrived, they would start enjoying the show. There, she meets a guy in his early 20s, wearing a necklace with blood in it. His name is Jeremy Steinke. And throughout their conversation, he would ask how old she is. And she would tell him that she's even though her actual age is only 2. But much to her surprise, Jeremy's reaction doesn't seem bothered by the age gap. Instead, he tells her that he's 23, and they both exchange their online profiles and leave with a reason to keep in touch. After going back home, Jasmine quickly adds Jeremy on Vampire Freaks under the username SoulEater52 and soon follows him on a couple of other sites. From there, they would start talking every day, with Jeremy telling her that he's a 300-year-old werewolf who drinks blood regularly, and that the necklace he wears is filled with blood in case he ever gets the urge. As the months go by, their chats would grow more frequent and more personal, and Jeremy's mindset would slowly start to rub off on her. The way they speak begins to change, with their messages turning disturbingly romantic and obsessive. Jasmine would start dressing more gothic too, and take on a darker personality, mirroring Jeremy's behavior completely. Eventually, the two of them would also begin referring to each other as a couple on Vampire Freaks. In one of the messages, he would write, "Gods, I can't get over not seeing or talking to you. I yearn to hear your soft, subtle voice and long to be held in your arms, wherever that may be. I don't care. There isn't anything that could ever replace the way you make me feel. I miss you, I love you, and I wish that we could just go somewhere." Not long after that, as some kind of proof of his love, Jeremy sends Jasmine a vial of his own blood, just like the one he wears around his own neck. and it doesn't take long for their relationship to spill into real life. Jasmine's parents, Mark and Deborah, would also soon become horrifyingly aware that their daughter has been talking to an adult boyfriend online. At first, they try to stay calm and understand what's going on, but after seeing the way Jeremy talks to her and learning more about him, they immediately cut him off by grounding Jasmine, taking her computer away and leaving her with no way to reach him at all. However, after doing what her parents asked for a while, Jasmine somehow gets back in contact with Jeremy. Only this time, she's a lot more careful with hiding their relationship from them. Jeremy, however, is still furious about what they did, and he sends her a message, lashing out in a violent poem that makes his anger disturbingly clear. My lover's parents are totally unfair. They don't know what's going on and just assume. She's slowly going insane. She continues to think that I came. Their throats I want to They shall pay for their insolence. Finally, there shall be silence. Their blood shall be payment. And if you think the poem's the end of it, you'd be completely wrong, as the idea that they couldn't be together while her parents were still in the way starts frustrating them. Both of them would begin joking about getting rid of them and living together forever. Jasmine would even respond to the poem by sending him a message saying, I miss you more than killing people. Can we get together and kill people? Rawr, I hate them. So I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you. Jeremy replies, telling her he loves the plan, but he'd need to be creative in how they go about it. Meanwhile, her parents actually think that Jasmine is doing better ever since they kept her away from Jeremy, and even their youngest, 8-year-old Tyler Jacob has just started going to school. Everything seems to be going fine. On the Sunday morning of April 23rd, 2006, as the whole neighborhood was going out about their daily lives, a young boy we'll call Lewis heads out to play with Jasmine's brother, Tyler. But after knocking on their door multiple times, no one's responding. This strikes Lewis as strange, as not only are the Richardson always home on Sundays, their car is also sitting right there in the driveway. Curious about it, Lewis steps off the porch and walks over to the side window facing the basement. It's hard to see inside at first, but once his eyes adjust, he notices someone lying flat on the floor. Knowing that something was seriously wrong, he rushes back home, and the instant he arrives, he tells his mother what he just saw, and so she calls the police right away. As soon as they arrive at the house, the first thing they notice is that the door is actually unlocked. So they go inside and head to the basement, and they find not just one, but 2 bodies on the ground, in a pool of their own blood. Mark and Deborah Richardson. The officers quickly secure the area and begin searching the rest of the home. Upstairs, they find Tyler, lying motionless in his bed. He passed away in the same way as his parents. From what it seems, all 3 had suffered multiple stab wounds, and judging by the scene, it looked like they were attacked while completely off guard. There was no sign of forced entry either, and nothing inside the house was actually stolen. But as they took a closer look around and see the family pictures on the walls, it becomes clear that the Richardson family isn't made up of just 3 people. A young girl, who we know as Jasmine, is missing from the scene. The police assume that the murders were the result of a home invasion, and that Jasmine had been taken by the same person or people who killed her family. And so soon after, the police would begin working non-stop to find the girl. They start looking into her school and her friend group, and are soon given access to her school records, including what's inside her locker. But what they find in there points to something completely strange. Alongside her usual school stuff, they find a hand-drawn stick figure comic. It shows a family going for a walk, until one of them breaks off and walks over to a man's truck. From there, the 2 would then gradually pour gasoline onto the other 3 family members and set them on fire, standing there as they screamed in pain. After seeing this, the police took it upon themselves to stop treating Jasmine's disappearance like a kidnapping. And with the man's name written on the comic as Jeremy, they finally have someone to look for. They start questioning several of Jasmine's friends, and they're able to come up with a lead and identify the man as Jeremy Allen Steinke, based on what they're saying. He was obsessed with Jasmine and constantly doing just about anything to keep her attention. And to make things even worse, they also say that Jasmine had often talked about taking the lives of her own parents. And with those tips combined with the trail of proof gathered online, like messages, emails, and chat logs, the officers quickly figure out the motive. Afterwards, the news of the suspected killer spread across the country, throwing the small community of Medicine Hat into a wave of shock and disgust. Because of this huge wave of attention, this would end up being the thing that would take them down, as shortly after, they get spotted at a gas station less than 100 miles away from the city. It turns out they had spent the last 24 hours hanging out with friends, who either either weren't aware of what they did or thought they were just messing around. Jasmine and Jeremy were seen laughing about it, describing how they took the lives of her family in full detail, treating the whole thing like some sort of joke. Eventually, Jeremy's truck gets successfully tracked in a field by the officers, and it's discovered that this is the place the two of them spend their night together. They fully surround the area and actually arrest both Jeremy and Jasmine right away on the suspicion of ending the lives of 3 people. Once they're taken into custody, officers would begin a full interrogation to figure out what really happened that night, and both of them would start talking. Jeremy would claim that Jasmine had begged him to help get rid of her parents, no matter what it took, and since he supposedly would do anything to keep her, he says he had no choice but to go through with it. On the other hand, Jasmine quickly throws Jeremy under the bus by telling them that he's the only person who did the crime. She says that she was only talking about taking the lives of her family as a joke and never actually intended to follow through with the plan that they made. However, officers are able to figure out that Jeremy's version actually lines up more than Jasmine's. The huge amounts of online messages showed that the two of them had stuck to their plan from the very beginning, and even though they both tried to push their own version of what happened, investigators eventually figured out how the entire thing happened. It all starts on the night of April 22nd, when Jasmine secretly lets Jeremy, who was wearing a mask, inside the house. He then quietly makes his way to the basement. Down there, Deborah was doing the laundry, and that's when Jeremy pulls out a 6-inch folding knife and lunges at her. Deborah would scream and call for help, which actually woke Mark up. He rushed towards the basement, and the second he would get there, he would see his wife on the floor with a strange man standing over her. Upon seeing this, Mark would rush towards Jeremy and tackle him, trying to wrestle the knife out of his hands, but as the two of them fought on the ground, Jeremy would manage to stab him over and over again. Upstairs, as all of this was happening, Jasmine would quietly walk into her brother's room, with him now awake in the bed, and just like they planned, she would end the life of her own brother just like that. And after all of that, they would spend the next whole day together, expressing a severe lack of remorse, and they've even been spotted cuddling and kissing in a restaurant before visiting their friends and bragging about what they did. And only a year later, in June 2007, the two of them would finally be put on trial separately for the murders of the Richardson family. And since Jeremy was already an adult, he's tried under the full extent of the law. His defense argued that he was just a weak-willed, immature man with a history of abuse from his mother's boyfriend, but none of them would work in his favor. So Jeremy would end up getting 3 life sentences, with 25 years before he's even eligible for parole. Jasmine, on the other hand, would actually stay anonymous throughout her trial and is only referred to as J.R. But with all of the evidence stacked against her, she's also found guilty of murdering her mother, father, and little brother, and she would get 10 years. Now, after actually serving this time and with years of therapy and being fully cut off from Jeremy, she would slowly start to show what some people call remorse. And with the case's judge, Scott Brooker, even stating, "I think your parents and brother would be proud of you. Clearly, you can't undo the past. You can only live each day with the knowledge you can control how you behave and what you do each day." For the last 5 years of her sentence, Jasmine would actually attend a university in Calgary while still under supervision, and by 2016 she was officially released, now living quietly among the public. And while some people believe that the 10 years is far too short for what she did, others argued that she was just a young person making a mistake, manipulated by a deranged adult. Her record's been wiped clean, and since then, Jasmine likely goes by a different name and hasn't been in any trouble. Jeremy, on the other hand, is still locked up.